Last week, we learned about the man, Neil Postman, and his influence on our culture, as well as his seemingly prophetic words about technology's shaping power of our society. We'll return to Postman and his shaping influence in future episodes, but I wanted us to hear from another brilliant thinker, Andy Crouch. Andy is partner for theology and culture at Praxis. You can read more about Praxis in the show notes. His writing explores faith, culture, and the image of God in the domains of technology, power, leadership, and the arts. He is the author of 5 books. He was an editor and producer at Christianity Today. His work and writing have been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Time. For 10 years, he was a campus minister with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at Harvard University. In the first episode of this series, I said that Andrew Noble is a voice the church needs to listen to in the area of technology. Andy Crouch has probably been the primary voice I've benefited from in this area of culture. Recently, he participated in a discussion with Jonathan Haidt entitled, "Hey Siri, How Do I Find Myself?" I'd encourage you to check it out and be sure to check the show notes for that link. I thought it would be interesting to hear the origins of Andy's interest in technology. And as I asked him this question, he pointed to 3 primary influences.
Well, I think there are maybe 3 answers to that, actually. So the first is that I was like the original geek as far as computers went. So I vividly remember my father, who taught at Syracuse University, bringing home a terminal. This will be completely unfamiliar language to anyone under the age of like 50, but a terminal that you could hook up to your phone, your landline phone, and at 300 baud, which is 300 bits per second, which is very slow, it would like spit out, you could go back and forth with the mainframe computer at Syracuse University. So sitting in our home in Fabius, New York, south of Syracuse, New York, being able to like program little basic programs. So I was 10 years old. I was like, this is amazing. And it started this lifelong fascination with coding and kind of the under the hood reality of computers, which now there's way more above the hood than under the hood. But back then, the only way you did technology was by actually getting into the nitty gritty of it. So first of all, just lifelong geek until I hit high school, when I think not incidentally became a Christian, but also honestly took an English class that really just opened up my imagination in certain ways that hadn't been up to then. I definitely thought I was going to do software and coding my whole life. So I could have been a geek. So there was that level. Then I would say there was the collision between that and marriage and parenting. So my wife is a physicist. Catherine teaches physics at Swarthmore College. And so she works every day with, super high-tech instrumentation. But she's like the most sane human being at home with tech you will ever meet, and always has been. And I am not. I was the geek. And I remember explaining to her at one point that we needed to get a new computer and that I should get the new computer and she should get the old computer, because I said, you would treat the new computer like a thing, but I'll treat it like a person. So like I'll honor it in our home more than you will. So I should get the new Mac or whatever it was. So my wife was tremendously helpful in helping me recognize the ways that my kind of fascination with technology was not always healthy for the relational world of the home. And of course, the real irony is I ended up writing this book, Tech-Wise Family, and people think I'm the expert on this. Most of the things that we did in there, Catherine originated, and I'm just the one who wrote it down because I am the writer in the family and she's the scientist. So that's the second answer, is the collision between my own unhealthy, sometimes, preoccupation with tech and what was needed for marriage and family to thrive. And then the third thing is that honestly, it was a single book, Albert Borgman's book, Technology and the Character of Contemporary Life, which was written in the 1980s, published, I think, in 85 or 87, by this philosopher who taught at the University of Montana. When I read that book in the mid-1990s, I guess, I suddenly realized this is the story of the modern world. And I, at that point and to today, care a lot about, very large topics like culture and what's happening to the human in our modern culture. And I just became convinced this is up to that point, John, I had thought it was consumerism. I was like, we live in a consumer culture, and that's the problem. But I realized you don't have consumer culture without, for one thing, the economic abundance that comes through the kind of deployment of technology, especially after the Second World War. So you don't have consumerism without tech, but also the technology and its dreams are so much deeper than even the consumer society's dreams. They're very congruent with each other. And so it was that cultural layer, so kind of personal interest, personal confrontation with its limits, and then realizing this is like the key to knowing the world that we're in and naming the world that we're in, that got me and has kept me interested in technology as a topic.
Technology is the story of the modern world. As Christians, we are all drawn to stories. We're created by a God who gave us a book, a God who didn't simply give us a list of do's and don'ts, but a God who told us a story. Each of us is living a story right now, and Andy tells us that technology is the lens through which we live, see, and interpret much of the story we're telling. Without a doubt, Scripture is the ultimate lens through which we live our story. But this perspective helps us grasp how vast the implications of technology are. It's important for us to reflect on the vast implications of technology's impact, but zooming in on our smartphones, I decided to ask Andy the same question I've asked every guest on this series. How would you describe your relationship with your smartphone? He gave an answer that I wasn't prepared for.
For about 6 years, by the grace of God, I feel completely free. So, to me, the question to ask about all things in the world are, does this help me to love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love my neighbor as myself, or not? Is it a pathway to love or an impediment to love? Now, there are still dimensions of technology that are definitely an impediment in my health, but the smartphone specifically absolutely was an impediment until about 6 years ago. And so basically I did two things that changed it. One is I got rid of all notifications and all of the intermittent reinforcement apps. So I have no social media on my smartphone. I'm barely on social media anymore, but to the extent I am, I do it on my laptop, not on my phone. I don't get email notifications. There's just none of that Pavlovian, little dings of importance.
Yeah.
So it's become very uninteresting in that sense. So there was that kind of subtraction. I just don't use it that way. It's on mute all the time. It doesn't buzz. It just doesn't notify me. But then the other thing I did, so there's the subtraction element, but then the additive element, I've talked about this in a number of places so people may know, but while I was writing the book, The Tech-Wise Family, was when I really started to change the relationship, honestly. And the most important thing I did was we always have had our phones, or for many, many years, we've had our phones and other glowing rectangles plugged in outside our bedrooms. They're all in the kitchen, plugged in overnight. So I go downstairs, but up until the writing of The Tech-Wise Family, it is embarrassing to say, I would go downstairs, and while my tea was steeping, which is the addiction I am not giving up, but don't ask me about my relationship to tea, I would pick up my phone. And of course, this is back when I had all the notifications too. And I'd start scrolling through the notifications. And I just realized this is not healthy. This is not the way to start the day, right? So obvious now, but it was a realization for me. And so I decided I would start every day by going outside. So for 7 years now, I think with maybe 3 days that are exceptions, every single day since then, I have gone outside before I look at a screen. And I actually think that's made more difference than taking the apps away that served up all the kind of intermittent reinforcement, because there is something, it's so embarrassing that my spiritual life is at such a puny level that the mere act of going outside can be like the most spiritually transformative thing I've done in the last 10 years. But I did it this morning. I walk outside. It's a little cold. It's a little rainy this morning. And I'm like, okay, I'm a creature. I'm in the midst of creation. I'm small. God is big. The world's big. Mm-hmm. I smell the world. I hear the world, and it's so much bigger than me and my screen. And then I go back inside, and it just doesn't have the same power over me. So in recent years, that would be the way it has worked out. In other times of my life, not nearly as healthy.
I love that Andy talks about going outside. It seems so simple, and he says it is, but it's a way we can seek to be embodied in a world that's increasingly disembodied. As we talk a bit about this morning routine, I wanted to hear his thoughts on something along these lines. Something I'd love for you to just kind of react to, because, it seems like over the last, 10 years or so, there's so much literature talking about the illiteracy, biblical illiteracy in the church, that more and more Christians are reading the Bible less and less. And to me, it seems like we've reached a point in our culture where we're becoming illiterate in God's second book, his book of creation.
Oh, wow.
Living
less
disembodied lives. And so for you to say, even if it's 5 seconds being outside, that is significant, because, our culture is so deprived of this. So I'd love for you just maybe react to that thought and kind of elaborate a little bit.
That said, it's so interesting. I have not quite thought of it in terms of the two books, Here's the thing. The Bible is still available in some form. Most people could get a printed one if they want, but everyone can get to it online, right? So it's more available than ever. It's less read. In a way, the tragedy of the natural or the created order is it is not even available, because the most vivid example of this is the night sky. Before 100 years ago, every human being had the experience of walking out and being under what James Joyce calls the heaven tree of stars, and seeing the Milky Way, and seeing the Milky Way cast a shadow on the ground. If you put your hand down next to the ground, the Milky Way alone can cast a shadow when it's dark enough. And I venture to say probably only 10% of humanity has that experience today. I don't know the exact number, but given urbanization, given light pollution, I walk out my front door, it's winter, or getting to be winter as we're recording this, and so it's dark in the morning, and I can see Orion's belt, and I can sometimes see the Big Dipper if it's the right time of day or night. But I can see like a countable number of stars because I live in an urban area. And it's only because I've had the privilege, really, of traveling to places where the night sky is truly dark that I know that what you see when you are under the true night sky completely reshapes your imagination of who you are and who God is. And every human being had that experience without asking for it or having to have the privilege of traveling to see it. And now most human beings will go their whole lives and never see it. And so while the Bible is maybe not read for many reasons, it's not because it's not available, but the book of nature is not read because it's literally now closed by human technology.
The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. These are the first two verses of Psalm 19. Theologians refer to God's word as special revelation. And in these two verses of special revelation, we read a truth about what theologians refer to as God's general revelation. This refers to God's revealing of his existence in a general sense to everyone through creation, declaring that the skies reveal to us that there is a God. The mountains, the trees, the stars, the ocean, humanity itself reveals there is a God. But as Andy says, there's a sense in which this second book is now closed. Much of its closure is due to the pervasiveness of the digital age. Before we go to a break, however, Andy gives some specific instruction to parents, youth leaders, churches, any of those who lead the next generation in some capacity.
If you're responsible, it's interesting. I said this not thinking about it like this podcast, but because this is especially for people who work with youth. I said, if you're responsible for young people, I think you have almost like a moral obligation to get them to an international dark sky sanctuary, which is this set of areas that have been identified. And there are places in the US like this that qualify as still the darkness that the world once had every night. And get them there and give them this experience. Like, you owe it to people you're responsible for their spiritual development, for them to have the spiritual experience of being under the stars. And while I think that in and of itself as a actual reality is enough to be very tragic, I think it's also metaphorical for the ways in which we just, Bill's environment is a good thing. Human beings have always shaped their environment to be able to live in the world. We have this odd property as creatures that we can't live in the world without adding culture to it. But we now have these cultures, especially in urban settings, that crowd out the natural, such that, when I go outside in some places, like I mentioned, like there was a hotel in Sydney, Australia, which is not otherwise a very nice place, but I walked out of this hotel and I was like in this alleyway and the tiny little sliver of sky above me, still valuable to be out in unconditioned air, for example, but gosh, missing so much of what human beings could take for granted. So I think that's a profound observation, that this book is, not just little read, but not even available to many people.
We'll be right back.
I'm Walt Mueller at the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, and I'm excited to invite you to the 3rd Annual Northeast Youth Ministry Summit held in beautiful Ligonier, Pennsylvania from March 17th to 20th. We're excited to partner once again with our youth ministry co-workers at Reformed Youth Ministries to co-sponsor this 4-day youth ministry training conference. This year, our theme is Changing World, Unchanging Word. We've put together a team of 26 experienced speakers and trainers who will lead, encourage, and equip you with theological depth and faithfulness as you experience rich community. You don't have to be from the Northeast to attend. In fact, last year we had attendees ranging in age from 19 to 77 who came from 21 states and 3 countries. You can get all the information on the Northeast Youth Ministry Summit and register by visiting nymsummit.org. That's nymsummit.org. I hope to see you in Ligonier in March.
If you visit darksky.org, you'll learn that there are over 160,000 square kilometers of protected land and night skies in 22 countries on 6 continents. For reference, the entire Earth is 510.1 million square kilometers. The U.S. is a little over 9.1 million square kilometers of land. To hear that dark sky sanctuaries are only 160,000 square kilometers is a bit shocking. Dark Sky International seeks to restore the nighttime environment and protects communities from the harmful effects of light pollution. I'd encourage you to visit darksky.org and see if there's a dark sky sanctuary near you. The sky of Psalm 19, which proclaims God's handiwork, is still with us. You can look at it right now as you listen to this in your car or go for a walk, or step outside and see it. If we're honest, though, our eyes are often more focused on the screen than the sky. What aspects of creation are we missing? What truths of general revelation are preteens and teens deprived of? Our lives and the lives of younger generations are becoming more disembodied. What can we do to live embodied lives? Here's what Andy said.
There's a great example, an organization that we got to support through Praxis that came through our accelerator program that I think illustrates a couple things about this. The organization is called Girl Trek. It was co-founded by a couple folks, but the person we worked with was the co-founder, Vanessa Garrison, who's the CEO now. And Girl Trek is specifically an organization that encourages and equips African-American women in particular, though open to anyone, but really particularly serving Black women in the United States and now around the world, to go outside and walk. And Vanessa was moved to start this organization for multiple reasons that all intersect. And one was health, that it's just good for the human body to walk. Like it's the most basic form of exercise, the thing all of us who are able-bodied can do and should do. But the thing is that because of the complex history of our own country, many, many Black families, and therefore Black women, live in environments where people often don't go outside. They may not feel it's safe. It may just not be culturally expected. There is technology involved. We've become a culture of the screen in the car, and a lot of people spend a lot of time in front of the screen and a lot of time in the car. And so you lose that cultural kind of the cultural grooves that have people go out and walk. And other cultures, like you go to, Europe Southern Europe in any evening, and you're going to see people walking around their city. But that's not true in most American cities. It's not true in the poorer parts of most American cities, where a disproportionate number, though not the majority, of Black individuals live. And so Vanessa had this vision, like, why don't we get women walking together? But of course, the really cool thing is, once women are out walking, it actually changes the neighborhood, right? So if your neighborhood is a place where people walk, it actually changes like what kind of deals are being done in that neighborhood and what kind of level of safety do people feel. Because actually, when I'm in a neighborhood, one of the ways if I know whether it's good for me as a visitor to walk is, do I see people walking themselves, or is everybody kind of shut up in their cars? And I think, maybe I won't go out and be the first. But if you go out as a group and you live there, right? So it's this culturally transformative thing. It's this health transformative thing. And it's this relational thing that binds people together because you go with your friends. And millions of women now have been on Girl Trek walks. So I think that's a beautiful proxy for something all of us need, not just Black women, which is I would say in almost any setting in the world, if you go with other people, and especially if you do reside there, there is a safe way to walk around your neighborhood, or there's at least a time of day when it's safe. And it will start to change the neighborhood if you do it. And I do think walking is a very fundamental human activity that we should all be doing with other people. And especially if we have spiritual responsibility for other people. There is the conversations that happen on a walk are different from the conversations that happen, sitting in a room.
It's been so interesting for me to hear how frequently the simple act of walking assists us to live embodied lives. You'll hear that repeated more in future episodes. As we close this episode, listen to this story Andy tells about a walk between a father and a son.
A friend of mine was just telling me a very moving story about taking his 12-year-old on a long walk, a 6-day, I think, hike through the White Mountains of New England, where you can go from hut to hut, and there are these overnight huts, and then you hike to the next one all day. And they did this as father and son, and he said it was all good. Every day was good. But on the 5th day of 6, he said, my son started telling me his secrets. He started telling me the stuff he had never had anyone to talk to about. Wow. And he said, we just had the most transformative conversations as father and son on day 5, right? And so you don't get there just quickly. But if you keep doing it, on those long walks, in that case, through the mountains, through nature, investing in that, it just changed. And I've met that now young man, and he's a disciple of Jesus, I think in part because his dad took him hiking.
The conversations that happen on a walk are different than the conversations that happen in a room, says Andy. I've found that to be so true in my own life. I wonder if you have as well. In the next episode, we'll continue along these lines as we talk about how to be a person. It's harder than you think. You've been listening to Digital Christianity by Reformed Youth Ministries. For more information about our summer conferences, youth leader training, and resources, visit rym.org. If you would take the time to leave a positive review and share this podcast with others, it's one small way to help our ministry. Stay tuned to the RYM podcast for more great content that seeks to serve the church in her efforts to reach and equip youth for Christ.